This
do what I'm
conference will
saying.
now be recorded.
So now we are officially recording this event, and so it will also be, the chat will also be recorded. So please feel free to exchange documents or views. We have not long, we have until 10:30 a.m. Montreal time, which is in about an hour and a half. Please mute yourself when you're not participating so that we can minimize noise. Also, the sequence of what we want to have today would begin by me giving you a quick view of the agenda. Then I will go to the objectives of this meeting. And then I will immediately request the Executive Secretary of the Convention, Mrs. Elizabeth Mrema, to share some initial thoughts. And then we will go through a list of speakers that I will clarify to you. Then we will have a question and answer sessions, which should be lasting at least 40 minutes before we conclude at around 10:30. So without further ado, let me go quickly on the agenda of the event that we have before us. And again, please feel free to ask any questions. As I said, we will have first Mrs. Elizabeth Mrema as Executive Secretary of the CBD, which will share welcome with you. Afterwards, I will invite the chair of the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, Mrs. Charlotta Sörquist, as chair of this meeting to address this group briefly. Then my colleague Marcus and I will go through with you a presentation that will outline the work of the informal advisory group on mainstreaming, and will also outline the two documents that we are here to review. One of them is the document SPI/3/13, which is the long-term approach on mainstreaming as a complement to the global framework. And there is the add one to that, which itemizes some activities. It's a catalog of potential activities, and it's called the action plan. So Marcus and I will give you a brief overview of that through a presentation. And then we will have a number of free statements. First of all, I will ask Mrs. Teresa Lim as representative, as one of the experts, but she has been selected also because of her experience from developing countries. And she has also helped us very often as in kind of an informal chair of the informal group. Then we will ask for the expert who was nominated by the EU and who has a lot of experience from the perspective, not only, but also from the perspective of developed countries. Then we will ask the expert on business, Mr. Peter White, representing the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. Then I will ask Mrs. Helena Paul, who represents the CBD Alliance of NGOs. So doesn't represent, but she is an expert nominated by that group. So we will invite her to talk to us about the perspective of civil society organizations. And then if available, and I haven't received the confirmation from representing or as a part of the informal indigenous forum, Indigenous Peoples Forum, we will ask Mrs. Georgie Carino, who is the expert who has been nominated by indigenous peoples and local communities. After that, Marcus and I will moderate the question and answer sessions. Please feel free to indicate to me that you would like to speak. If you want, there's also the possibility of sharing slides. And finally, we will have the conclusion. And so I just want to remind people that the objectives of this webinar are to introduce those documents that I just mentioned, the one on the long-term approach on mainstreaming and the one on the action plan. It's also important that aside from the mainstreaming approach itself, the document SPI 3/13 includes a progress report on everything that the group has done. It includes a description of the architecture and how the long-term approach, I'm sure that will be of your interest, how it interacts with the post-2020 global framework and many other documents and components of the framework. It will also, the document also has a report on the activities that the Secretariat and our partners have done related to mainstreaming ever since Decision 14/3. And it also contains suggested elements for a draft recommendation from the subsidiary body of implementation under the chairmanship of Mrs. Charlotta, and to the third meeting of the working group 2020 in Colombia next year, as well as to COP15. And those, it also includes an annex that explains how the long-term approach on mainstreaming interacts with the Global 20 biodiversity framework, also in terms of indicators. So the first objective is to introduce those two documents. Then it is, as we said, to invite a variety of positions and considerations. This is a pre-session document, so we are asking you to start positioning yourselves in regards to that. And we also, of course, then want to clarify the process from here to COP13. So please feel free to ask us any question how it will go, and collect your views and positions. This is what we would like to do with you. For any questions, the reference documents that I mentioned are all posted on the CBD website. So with this, I finish my part, and I would like to invite, I don't see any questions in the chat. I think if you have any questions, again, please feel free to post them in the chat. Otherwise, I will now invite Mrs. Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, to give us a few introductory remarks. Elizabeth, please feel free to come in, and thanks and good morning or good afternoon to you.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Can you confirm?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can, loud and clear. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, dear delegates of the parties, members of the Informal Advisory Group and its extended network, dear participants in this webinar from all sectors and levels in government and society. It is indeed my honor to open this event only with a few words, namely, first, to sincerely thank you all for your time to attend this webinar. Two, and more important, to reiterate the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity, not only in the Rio and Biodiversity Liaison Group of Conventions, but also for the Sustainable Development Goals in general, and so many other relevant processes in the UN, in business and finance, and for society in general. We've heard this clearly at the UN Summit on Biodiversity, as well as the Nature for Life Hub events just a week ago, and from all headlines, from all leaders, as well as from the youth, indigenous peoples, executive, everyday people, underlining the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity across the economic sectors of society. Mainstreaming, as the articles of the convention remind us, is integrating biodiversity in relevant plans, programs, policies, and adopting economically and socially sound measures. These act as incentives for the conservation and sustainable use of nature, and ensuring that our activities do not only cause damage to our environment or that of our neighbors or areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Fundamentally, mainstreaming is about making the wise use of biodiversity and its services, of nature in all its values, central to all of our dealings in government, in business and finance, and in our everyday life, as people everywhere are using all the best sources of science and knowledge available to us. This is why it was so encouraging in these troubled times of the pandemic and economic crisis to welcome this unique mobilization on mainstreaming, and also of critical non-parties to support the work of the 30-member informal advisory group by parties, UN agencies, finance and business networks, and other organizations, including rights and other shareholders. Your support in leading to good contributions also from an extended network of over 40 experts around the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will be appreciated. I want to note that the documents, though benefiting from their input, still remain the responsibility as the Secretariat, ours. They are tools we offer towards the outcomes of the upcoming meetings of the convention bodies on implementation, as well as the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I welcome your contributions of this very diverse and influential group of experts selected in a very competitive process, whose members have exchanged views in over 10 remote events, a side event in Montreal, and an informal meeting prior to the second meeting of the Working Group 2020, the second one held in Rome in February. I thank the support received from the Food and Agriculture Organization, who will continue to support us and support the improvements made to these documents being presented today under the agenda item 11 of the subsidiary body on implementation, the third. As the stewards of this contribution, and with the support and contribution of the speakers we will hear, we in the Secretariat of the Convention want to share with you the 2 pre-session documents on mainstreaming, which we developed also building on their work. We hope that these documents will achieve their main objectives as indicated in the presentations to follow. I invite all participants to contribute to a meaningful discussions towards a strong and ambitious, yet feasible, long-term approach to mainstreaming as part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I note the use of the word wise, which began with the Ramsar Convention all those years ago. And I must say, wise is a good way to describe your leadership as your employee. I must say that. It's great to hear those very good words. Next, I would like to invite the chair of the 3rd meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, Charlotta, and please, my personal excuses to you. So the words you will hear now come straight from Charlotta's heart. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. And dear participants, I'm very happy to be here today. It's my pleasure to also, from my perspective as SBI chair, to welcome you all to this webinar. I have been asked to give you some remarks on mainstreaming in the negotiations, and as you know, mainstreaming is on the SBI free agenda, and as you've already been informed, the documents have been prepared and are posted on the CBD website for consideration by SBI. First, I would like to give you some background. The convention text itself contains several relevant provisions related to mainstreaming. And mainstreaming has also been an important topic in many meetings with the conference parties. And as you know, many of Aichi biodiversity targets are also relevant for mainstreaming. Past decisions of the convention already highlight the importance of mainstreaming biodiversity into economic sectors and transversally across all levels of government. At COP13 2016 in Cancun, the concerned parties considered strategic action to enhance the implementation, including with respect to mainstreaming, in particular, mainstreaming related to agriculture, forest, fisheries, aquaculture, and tourism. And also at the latest COP14 2018 in Sharm el-Sheikh, mainstreaming was an important topic. In decision 14/3, the conference of parties considered the mainstream biodiversity into sectors of energy and mining, infrastructure, manufacturing and processing, and health, and decided to establish a long-term strategic approach for mainstream biodiversity. And as you of course all know, COP14 also decided to establish the informal advisory group on mainstreaming of biodiversity. Further, the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at its first meeting, invited the informal advisory group to include in its report to SBI concrete proposals as relevant. And the work of the informal advisory group is now to be submitted to the SBI for consideration at its third meeting. So, mainstreaming will be considered SBI free as agenda item 11. Pursuant to already mentioned requests, SBI will consider the progress report on the work of informal advisory group as provided in CBD/SBI/3/13 and the accompanying addendums and information notes. And you will have more, you already heard some about the document, what they contain, and you will get more information about it. But in the document, you will also find a draft recommendation for the consideration of SBI. But I would like to underline it's important to bear in mind that most agenda items at SBI are cross-cutting and interrelated. For example, you do have other agenda items like cooperation with other conventions, international organizations and initiatives. It's agenda item 8. It also links very much to mainstreaming. And both agenda item 8 and 11 relate to issues that can help to guide implementation. Similarly, resource mobilization and financial mechanism, agenda item 6, capacity building, knowledge management and communication, agenda item 7, mechanism reporting, assessment, review, implementation, agenda item 9, and review progress and processes, agenda item 3, represent means of supporting implementation and also have links to mainstreaming. Well, in addition, many of these agenda items have links to other processes, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The subsidiary body of implementation has been requested to contribute to the development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework as prepared by the open-ended working group, and the outcome of SBI3 will complement it with elements related to means to support and review implementation. So the guidance that relates to mainstreaming from the discussions coming from agenda item 11 will be an important part of a contribution from SBI to this open-ended working group. I'm looking forward to a presentation discussions today, and I do hope that you all will take the opportunity to actively participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, and again, thanks for preparing those thoughts. Next, I would like to share with you what Charlotte was talking about, and for that, Marcus and I will share a presentation which I will immediately show you. Can you see this presentation? Yes, if so, Marcus, can you come in and begin with the first part of this explanation? You will just tell me when you want me to change the slides, okay?
Yes, thanks, Oliver. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, loud and clear. Go ahead, please.
But I can't see the slides right now. So I wonder, see just someone in the chat indicates the same.
I haven't then yet shared the screen because I haven't clicked on share. This is my problem. I'm a bit of a beginner here. So now I think this has changed, has it?
Yeah, that's better. So you just need to enlarge it. Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Which of course I need to do on the actual file, not here, right?
Yeah.
Yes. There you go. Go ahead now, Mark.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. And I'll let you know when you have to slip the slide. Huh? So before I go, medias in res, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening again to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today and basically talk about that important stepping stone that we have now the draft LTAM before the SBI. It has been quite a journey, I have to say. And echoing Elizabeth, I also want to express my appreciation and thanks to the IAC and the individual members, as well as the larger network of partner organizations that we managed to engage in that work. And basically, I want to thank everyone for their commitment, for their hard work. It's been a pleasure interacting with you. But of course, this is just a stepping stone. I mean, I guess one of the elements that we want to perhaps have a first discussion on that, how can we best support implementation or actual implement the framework and the making use of the suggested elements in the action plan. So if you could you just move to the next slide, Oliver, please? Oliver? Excellent. So perhaps, I mean, Oliver gave already you a quick overview on the elements in the documentation. So I'm not going to repeat that, but focus on right on the LTAM and basically how it relates to the global biodiversity framework and the goals and targets in the global biodiversity framework. Now that we have the documents posted, as I said, in the draft recommendation, we have already language vis-a-vis the proposed role of the IAC, a future IAC, to support implementation review. Of course, the idea here is to basically use and piggyback on the experience that the group already attained through its existing work, including with the extended network, of course, but then also to see that we have some ongoing process to help implementation review specifically of the mainstreaming elements, the LTAM, but then also the mainstreaming elements and in the post-2020 framework as a whole. And in so doing, of course, we want to make best use and in fact synergize and re-energize, you could even say, other elements that or other basically existing processes, including in particular, for instance, the Global Forum on Business and Biodiversity, the Global Partnership, which has been a main kind of hub for engaging businesses for the past years, and where we see the number of national partnerships even growing, which is very good and indicative that this agenda is very active. But then also the action agenda for commitments.
Are you dressed and ready? You got your, okay. All right, mate. I see you're not dressed. Okay, you got to turn that off.
I'm sorry, somebody has come in. Can you please mute your microphone while you're not speaking, please? Thank you. Marcus, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm fine. If you could move to the next slide, please. So, just to explain the linkages between the long-term strategic approach, the one proposed in the documentation, and the larger post-2020 global biodiversity framework, it would be useful to recall the main structure, and of course, you will be very familiar with that overview graph, which has been used by the co-chairs in their communications in the past months on the post-2020 framework. So basically, if we go into further details, and that's on the next slide, Oliver, please. So it's basically, we have a couple of entry points for mainstreaming in the existing structure of the proposed structure of the post-2020 framework. If I start with the finest granularity or the most technical level, you could say, on the left-hand side, the tools and solution elements, you will see that a few targets, or actually quite a significant number of targets in there, are directly relevant two mainstreaming aspects of mainstreaming. That's most visible in targets 13 and 14, where we even have the term here. But then, of course, when we talk about sustainable consumption, when we talk about incentives and subsidies, there is also strong mainstreaming components here. And there are linkages then, of course, as our SBI chair already indicated, to other targets on resource mobilization, capacity building, etc., etc. So this is where really this is most closely to concrete implementation activities, if you may. But then there is in other sections of the post-2020 framework, there's also very direct links to mainstreaming, in particular when it comes to the mainstreaming into specific economic sectors. And that's, of course, because we know that certain sectors are key, say, in terms of priority sectors in a global level, because they relate most closely to the biodiversity agenda. So, and that's very clear, for instance, if you look at the 2050 goals and the associated milestones, look at, for instance, nature's contributions to people, the contribution to nutrition and food security, access to safe drinking water, etc. This is then basically directly pointing to the particular importance of the related sectors, agriculture, water, etc., for mainstreaming action. So if we move to the next slide, we have here a kind of more comprehensive overview on the possible links. So I mentioned already the targets that are in the basically tools and implementation to support tools mentions, 13, 14, 15, and 17. But then if you look at these other targets mentioned in the next bullet point, that's where we also have strong mainstreaming components or mainstream entry points for mainstreaming action, you could say. In particular with regard to certain economic sectors, as I said. There is already in the introductory section of the post-2020 framework a reference to the importance of this kind of integration or mainstreaming agenda. So this is a kind of like what we call here the horizontal recognition that mainstreaming is key to mainstreaming in the post-2020 target in a sense. Last but not least, when we talk about the theory of change in the revised zero draft, the post-2020 global biodiversity framework draft, there is a theory of change, and that of course then relates also to the theory of change for mainstreaming action, right? So in particular, when we think about the recent reports of the intergovernmental panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services and the nexus areas they identified, this is basically would be providing an important entry point here. So I think could you go to the next slide, Oliver, please? Yeah, exactly. Just to perhaps remind the last step, and I thank the IAC and the network in my introduction, but I have to say, I mean, it was also very hard work going back and forth through several iterations. And the last iteration is that we basically how should I put that? We didn't really reorganize, but we renamed and we kind of structured a bit further the elements in the LTAM. They come under specific action areas. We also kind of managed to beef up the on basically mainstreaming across civil society, the people everywhere part more consistently. And finally, on specifically on sectorial engagement, mainstreaming in specific economic sectors, that of course is an issue that is dear to the heart of many, in particular, of course, to those who work in individual economic sectors, be it businesses, be it specific government ministries, or be it specific NGOs. We have to bear in mind that COP13 perhaps not prioritized, but in terms of what they picked first, it was a prioritization, basically looking at the sectors that are most directly, if you may, linked to the biodiversity agenda, and that is agriculture, fisheries, forestries, tourism, where we have a long-standing work stream in the convention. And then COP14 basically enlarged this to 5 others: manufacturing, energy and mining, infrastructure, etc., where the linkages are more indirect, but where the impacts can nevertheless be very important indeed. And then, of course, now we're moving towards more like a kind of a cross-cutting perspective, ecological civilization, as you know. Which is, of course, relevant to all the sectors. If we talk then about finance, where we also have a specific dedicated element, they have another sector, and then, of course, innovation, even though not a sector as such, is certainly an important theme that needs to be paid more attention in the future, because it also relates to technology transfer, etc. So all this means that we have a large amount of sector. And the question, of course, is how do you prioritize meaningfully at global level, while at the same time avoiding prescriptive, too much prescriptiveness or, at the country level. I mean, you don't want to restrict parties in implementing the thing, and they might have sectors which are less relevant at the global level, but very relevant given their particular circumstances. So what we in the end, the design that we came up with was to basically avoid that prescriptiveness by doing 2 things. First of all, we would rely on any global priority sector identified coming from the post-2020 global biodiversity framework itself. But on the other hand, we would say, look, one concrete actions that you need to be taken if you want to move ahead with the mainstreaming agenda at national level is to clearly define at national level your own priority sectors. And many countries are already doing that, either implicitly, because it's just the natural way to do, or more explicit through dedicated planning processes, etc. So you say, look, we have an indicative catalog of sectors that might be important. The COP14 sectors, plus finance, plus innovation. Look at this and then decide on your own, basically, on which to put priority. So that's basically the overall approach vis-a-vis economic sectors taken in the framework. I think I'm at the end of my section, right? Oliver, you would take over from here.
Let me verify that. And yes, you are right, Marcus. Thank you so much. So my role now is to just give you a view of what the actual strategy is. I would like to not repeat what is already on those slides, particularly also because you have access to the full documents, which of course explain everything in a much deeper way. But maybe what I can do is just brief you on why we kept those 5 action areas, if you want. We have action areas, and then we have headline actions under each of those action areas. So the first one was basically to make sure that we do the horizontal and the vertical mainstreaming, which does mean that we want all sectors in all areas of government to cooperate when they talk about biodiversity. We want the mainstreaming of biodiversity into planning and finance and economy and energy and transportation and regional integration and the whole thing, but we also want the application of a territorial approach, meaning that we want to go to landscapes all the way down to the city, because the city is where a lot of those decisions are taken. So we talk about that in terms of the vertical mainstreaming, not that there's any level of height here, but just that we integrate the ecosystem approach, particularly those principles that talk about integrating land and seascape management. So it's basically, the first one is about vertical and horizontal mainstreaming. The second point that we wanted is about particularly finance and the budgeting and the incentives, because we thought that that would be a very important point. Everyone highlighted that. We saw that also in the statements in the UN summit on Wednesday. So the second entire action area is to make sure that there is systemic mainstreaming into the whole economic machinery and the political decisions that have to do with that. Then the next two important areas, of course, are when we bring in business, the private sector, and every sector possible. So the first, the third great action area is to decrease negative and increase positive impacts. And there was a lot of discussion here about the ambition of that, because we all know how steep the demands are to bend that curve. So how, you know, we heard in the World Economic Forum that in 3 years, business and finance will have metrics. So let's make sure that we help and improve those existing metrics. Let's make sure that we can measure that and that we can also apply the whole idea of sustainable consumption and production. Then separate from business itself, we created an action area on financial institutions, on finance, basically, because we understand that that is kind of it underpins business. It parameterizes business decisions. What happens in the finance world defines a lot of what happens in business. So this is why we also have a whole action area with a lot of indicative headline actions to address finance. And then finally, and you will see us here talking about that, the idea of so beautifully expressed in the SDGs of people everywhere. We need to make sure that mainstreaming is done with the full integration of every stake or rights holder group, not only women and youth and indigenous people and local communities and NGOs and people's organizations, but also farmers and all the key groups and interest people that we have, but also very important that they are not only made capable and informed of participating, but also that they feel the pinch themselves. We need people everywhere to adopt a sustainable lifestyle and consumption patterns. So this is where we close in those 5 areas. And so on our discussions, we decided, or we proposed to you, that the things that we have to work now based on this LTAM as it is on the action plan, what we need to think about is how to connect this long-term approach that is general to the national and sectoral processes. How can we make sure that those processes then actually become something that happens on the ground? The second thing, everyone was saying, you know, yes, we understand we need to have a new look, but please don't duplicate something that exists already. We have so many possibilities already in the CBD. So today, we have seen that when sectors and finance wants to come to us, we have the tools. We can bring them to many of the documents that we are. There's a high-level segment. There's, as Marcus said, the global partnership. There is the business forum, and there's the action agenda from Sharm to Kunming. So basically, we have to make sure that everyone comes inside the CBD and tells us what are the requests to the parties and to the non-parties. And then again, exactly as we don't want to duplicate anything that exists, we want to strengthen what exists. We also want to recognize, as we heard in the summit, the UN summit, that there is finance for nature already. There is a task force on financial disclosures. There's the business for nature, act for nature, the Danone and the One Planet for Biodiversity. there's so many initiatives curated in the World Economic Forum, such as the Friends of the Ocean Action and the high-level segment for a blue economy, and the Food and Land Use Coalition, which is kind of talking about food systems, you know, so many other partners. So we don't want to duplicate any efforts, and we also have to make sure to involve. We know that this is a thing that has yet to be addressed. How to make sure that indigenous peoples, local communities, NGOs, people's organizations, youth, and all the women and all rights and shareholders, how can they come in? How can we assure that cities are part of that, and subnational governments? How can we do what the Aichi Biodiversity Targets Task Force did before for the last one, that all UN organizations are going on along with this plan, and that science, the future nexus assessment and the sustainable use assessment of IPBS, all the findings of the science institutions like Future Earth, how can we make sure that the best science is provided to us? So this is kind of what we believe parties and non-parties could think about as they look at this document and see how they can guide the discussions at SBI 3. So at SBI 3, not only long-term approach, but also, as Charlotta very well reminded us, there's resource mobilization, there's capacity building, knowledge management, monitoring and evaluation assessment, all the issue with communication, education, public awareness. So obviously, mainstreaming has to be part of a whole toolbox to support the framework. And of course, these two have to be kept under regular review, and that needs to be a multi-stakeholder regular review. So how exactly are we going to create such a body that can keep it? That could be something that the informal advisory group, who is requested which mandate will be revised at SBI 3, the parties could decide to give the informal advisory group the additional mandate to, in view of all those other documents that will have come up now, okay, now tell us how this multi-stakeholder group is going to exist. So our dream scenario for when item 11 comes up, Charlotta, I don't know up to what extent you agree with us, but that's what we would like to see, reminding us all that the process that is currently going on under the leadership of the government of Scotland, as well as with ICLEI and the network of regions for sustainable development, the group of leading subnational governments for the Aichi biodiversity targets, the EU Committee of the Regions, and many others, they are working with the government of Scotland, with the support of UK, to a process that will ensure the vertical integration and the application basically of Principle 12 of the ecosystem approach, which says that every action should be done at the level where it is most effective. So in the measure that some of the measures of the global framework will be done most effectively at local or subnational level, then all the resources need to be put so that it is made most effective. This is the ecosystem approach. So we want to make sure that this Edinburgh process will also come in at item 11. So you will be listening, or the parties will be listening to what we just said, but also the Edinburgh process. After this, we hope to see some parties who will give us an example. And I was going to mention Rwanda because I'm personally helping Rwanda to develop a beautiful integrated approach to governance of the whole development, climate agenda, including biodiversity. That would be beautiful to see. And then we would love to see the offers and needs from parties. So let's see if we can learn from the COVID crisis. And that's very much what I'd like to share with you. Now let's see if I can also learn how to unshare the screen. I hope I did that. And I'm back to you. So now comes the time. I don't see any immediate comment on that. So my next step will be to begin to invite comments on that. And the very first comment will come from Dr. Teresa Lim. And for that, I will find, I think it's Mr. Sun. Just a second, please. Yes, James Santiago, I have him here. Where is he? Because she has requested the use of a slide. So, Mr. James Santiago, I have made you the presenter. I hope you can now show the screen for Dr. Teresa Lim. And again, Teresa, thank you so much for the work that you've done way beyond the call of duty. So thank you so much, Teresa. And James, just make sure that you can, yes. Teresa, the floor is yours, and thanks again.
Very much, Oliver and Marcus, and of course to all the members of the IAG for making our lives a little easier. Anyway, I've been invited to present the perspectives of developing countries in mainstream biodiversity. Of course, I'd like to greet everyone first. Chair Charlotta Sorquis, Executive Secretary Elizabeth Rema, and my fellow panelists. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Oliver mentioned COVID-19. These are extraordinary times, and it compels nations to examine their relationship with nature. Thus, the task of integrating biodiversity considerations into nation sustainable development plans has become more critical. Although I've been asked to present the perspectives of developing countries. If you will allow me, I would like to focus my talk on the ASEAN sub-region, which is a sub-region in the Asia and the Pacific, which is composed of 10 countries in Southeast Asia. I hope that the perspective of the ASEAN will also be reflective of the perspective of other developing countries in the context of mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors. So the ASEAN member states are aiming for a rapid prosperity in the next 25 years. But they've given more prominence now to mainstreaming biodiversity. There is a growing recognition of the contribution of nature conservation to socioeconomic growth. At the 36th ASEAN Summit, which took place virtually in June, where Vietnam is this year's chair, the leaders reaffirmed the importance of advancing cooperation on environmental protection and conservation with greater efforts to address cross-cutting issues for sustainable development. And in this meeting, they have already decided to have a cross-cutting measures so that allows various sectors to work together. Okay? So during the preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the ASEAN member states identified mainstreaming as one of the 4 action areas crucial in achieving the vision of the framework. In the past 2 years, the ASEAN has conducted several meetings relating to mainstreaming, particularly on their specific priority sectors such as infrastructure, tourism, and health. During the ASEAN Summit in 2019, the ASEAN leaders also highlighted the value of mainstreaming biodiversity into the various development processes in the region through the support of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. For the sub-region, therefore, it is an opportune time to initiate the process of mainstreaming biodiversity. The ASEAN member states are implementing, so the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan is a very important tool to implement mainstreaming of biodiversity. Some examples that are being carried out in the region are assure us that having clear targets and achievable commitments can facilitate long-term approaches to mainstreaming biodiversity. Some of the examples are shown on the screen. Singapore has initiated, of course, engaging financial institutions to consider environmental, social, and governance criteria, including, they're also leading, of course, in mainstreaming, in involving subnational governments in the mainstreaming process. In the Philippines, partnership between government companies for conservation is also being implemented. And in Thailand, on the other hand, incorporating biodiversity in the educational curriculum to normalize the use of application of biodiversity in the everyday lives of the students and the learners is being undertaken. So the recommendations to COP15 of adopting the long-term approach to biodiversity mainstreaming is a welcome development for the ASEAN member states. However, there are challenges that the ASEAN member states have also identified in mainstreaming. Two of the challenges cited were the difficulty in prioritizing biodiversity among the country's concerns and persuading other non-biodiversity government agencies to pay more attention to the concerns relating to biodiversity conservation. But overall, they feel that the need for continuous education and awareness raising on the values of biodiversity is ever present. So while national policies and laws directing mainstreaming are abundantly in place, there is much work to be done in terms of effectively implementing this into specific actions and scaling them down to the local levels. The ASEAN member states, in their submission to the first meeting of the OEWG, also identified some tools for mainstreaming. Some of them are on your screen. Among those tools include strengthening the clearinghouse mechanism, not just at the national level, but at the sub-regional level and the regional level as well. The use of the payment for ecosystem services and valuation has been considered an important tool to effectively mainstream. And then others include coordinating biodiversity mainstreaming, a framework for coordinating biodiversity mainstreaming with other sectors, the role of national governments in ensuring continuity at the subnational level and transcending the policies from top to down, and then the creation of sectoral coordination guidelines where each country can give priority to particular sectors. Another important measure tool is the emphasis is making the business how to make businesses more accountable in the mainstreaming process. So in closing, I would like to emphasize as well the critical importance of regional and sub-regional cooperation in our work. The joint work program of the ACB and the CBD is a recognition of the role of sub-regional cooperation to facilitate achievement of global biodiversity targets. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity is an intergovernmental body that provides crucial support in scaling up policy actions and capability building programs at the sub-regional level on key biodiversity concerns through effective coordination, communication, and partnership building. So the value of regional sub-regional cooperation was also underscored at the 9th Trondheim Conference. So working in synergy will aid in framing biodiversity-related targets and approaches that are more cognizant to countries that are similarly situated and have the similar capacities and resources, and should more responsive to their needs and goals. This robust cooperation on mainstreaming biodiversity is also most crucial under these trying times. So we can no longer separate biodiversity from our COVID-19 recovery efforts. So in closing, I would just like to quote the ASEAN Secretary General, Dato Lim Joy, in his article on COVID-19, which reflects the really importance of mainstreaming biodiversity in a lot of our work, from energy to agriculture, disaster management, and financing. So I don't have to recite it. It is on your screen. We're only given 5 minutes. But I will, of course, we will share this presentation to everyone, including a more comprehensive write-up of my feedback and my reaction in behalf of the developing countries, specifically the ASEAN. Thank you very much. Back to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much. I hope, yes, thank you so much also, James, for bringing it back to our group. So next, I would like to invite to give us a perspective also from developed countries, Mr. Lars Müller, who, aside from being an expert from the EU, is also very experienced in the whole global partnership and on business and biodiversity perspective. So over to you, Lars. Thank you so much.
I hope I can be heard. Thank you for the honor to be invited to also comment on this current draft long-term approach for mainstreaming. I would hopefully make up for some time. We are running late already, by making just a few remarks from an expert perspective. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the EU or my constituency. I'm speaking really as someone who is involved in mainstreaming, in particular mainstreaming biodiversity with private sector and business over the last few years. And I think that while not liking everything how it was now drafted, I think we have here a jewel that should not be wasted in terms of an action plan that is, with the long-term approach together, lists so many activities involving the change agents in very different areas that could, as a whole, really make a step change in terms of mainstreaming biodiversity, which is, in the context of, let's be honest, of the CBD, a rather dry and theoretical and abstract concept very often. But this long-term approach here, together with the action plan, translates this into a set of very, very concrete activities, concrete actions that deserve really to be looked at from the various players. And what I also would like to stress is that the perspective of the long-term approach is maybe something new also, that not only that the CBD is pointing with fingers to others who should be doing something, but rather it tries to also capture what is in it for them, to capture also why it is in the interest of those players in the private sector, of those players in the governmental area, in the society. So in those three main strategic areas, what is in it for them, so that it's really understandable why it's in their own interest to act on nature and to take a different way of decisions. I think that's a very, very important thing that we need to understand. So this has the potential to connect this rather abstract and sometimes remote microcosm of CBD negotiations directly with the real world, with those who are really taking day-to-day decisions and what they could be doing in order to really integrate biodiversity into their day-to-day decision-making. And the long-term approach, and together with the action plan, which I would like to stress, very much lists concrete and effective actions that mean something in the real world. For instance, let's take the example of business, why they should care, because it is a risk issue for them they need to understand, they need to measure these risks where they are jeopardizing their own supply chains and their own business model. So let's help them and let's work together with business where they can already integrate this into their own decision making. I think that was the main points I wanted to make, except that I should mention there's one thing I don't like at all in this long-term approach to mainstreaming, and that's the name. Parties have chosen a name that says long-term approach, and we are all humans. This makes us think, okay, this is long-term, this is time. This has still time to come, and well, let's see. But the opposite is the case. What we need is an immediate approach to mainstreaming. So if the further discussions at this webinar and then later in the negotiations could turn this into something that would trigger immediate actions and encourage those who are listed in the action plan as change agents who really could make a difference immediately, that would be fantastic. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lars, for your passionate contribution, as you've always been, and we value it very much. So thank you very much. Also, and now I'd like to ask Mr. Peter White, who acts as the ambassador, among many other things, to biodiversity in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Go on, Peter. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Oliver. And I'd just like to support all that Lars has just said. I think I have 5 minutes, and I'd like to make 5 points on the importance of mainstreaming and the role of business. So point number 1 really is just the important role of business. We greatly appreciate the inclusion and focus on business as an important part of the long-term approach, included as one of the 3 strategy areas. And I personally have greatly appreciated the inclusion on my participation on the informal advisory group. So we thank you for that. Business values nature and its impacts and dependencies, and healthy societies, resilient economies, and thriving businesses rely on nature. And you will have seen recently over 560 companies with revenues of over $4 trillion signed the Business for Nature call to action. Lots of companies are making commitments. It's not enough, but momentum is certainly growing. And I think the long-term approach and the global biodiversity framework, they need to be very clear on the role for business, what's expected, and it needs to have business relevant goals and targets that are clear and workable. Second point really is the importance of mainstreaming itself. And as Lars said, it should be the urgent approach to mainstreaming, not the long-term approach. Mainstreaming is absolutely central to reversing nature loss by 2030. We need to integrate nature into the climate, health, food, and prosperity agendas, and vice versa. And we're seeing increasing interlinkage between food, nature, climate, and COVID-19 has only highlighted the importance of thinking about these things in a joined up way. So mainstreaming is absolutely central to all of this. The LTAM, the long-term approach, it needs to be mainstreamed into the global biodiversity framework, and the framework needs to acknowledge explicitly that we're only going to reach these global goals if government, business, finance, and civil society all contribute and work together. We've heard mainstreaming needs to be across all sectors, government, business, and society, across all policies and government ministries, and particularly Treasury and Finance. But it also needs to be mainstreamed across the conventions, UNFCCC, UN, and also the UNCCD, as well as obviously UNCBD. In other words, it needs to be mainstreamed. We need to embed the value of nature into decision-making through rules and incentives at all levels. And if there's one thing you remember from my talk, I'd like to just say we should mainstream mainstreaming. That's the most important thing of all. My third point is around what's in the LTAM, and it's really good that the importance of incentives is recognized. It's in there, but it could be strengthened, but we need this whole area of rethinking subsidies as well as tax regimes to promote and reward businesses that are nature positive, because that's the way we'll have real change going forward. My fourth point is we need increased priority for nature-based solutions. They come out in the long-term approach. They have great potential for delivering a future that is equitable, carbon neutral, and nature positive. There's a lot of work going on in this area. WBCSD is in the process of providing guidance for companies on the implementation and best practice for nature-based solutions going forward. So we want to make sure that's part of the mainstreaming process too. My final point, nature is everybody's business. The call to action from Business for Nature says, together, let's protect, restore, and sustainably use our natural resources. We need to strengthen the business engagement and participation with the CBD process on implementation, both of the framework, but also the long-term approach going forward. And Oliver, your point about inclusion, having the review, the informal advisory group being part of the implementation and review process, we would fully support that. Clearly, next year is going to be a key year for nature and business, linked to the plethora of global events and summits that are coming up. Business for Nature, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development are highlighting the importance of collective process. And I think the CBD process can be a great way to both showcase success, but also provide a pathway for engagement in other similar summits. And so you will be truly mainstreaming across all of the meetings next year. I'll stop there. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you for how coherently you have guided us towards the goal that you just shared. And I can clearly see that the informal advisory group is such a multi-stakeholder group as it worked. It is half parties, half non-parties, and there's been remarkable coherence in it. So also thanks to people like you. And next, also somebody who contributed a lot, I'd like to request the intervention of Helena Paul, representing the CBD Alliance of NGOs. Helena has given us great input. So Helena, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much indeed. It's very good to be here. So I'll start quickly by saying the process. Decision 14.3 mentions the informal advisory group, but it doesn't mention the extended consultative network. And new members can be added to that merely by requesting their expertise. Now, we protested about that, but basically we were ignored. And we're surprised that parties don't object to the extended consultative network because they're outweighed by it in a way. So work on mainstreaming should be central to work on the GBF. I agree with previous speakers, yet only the select group so far has access to the mainstreaming process. So we're a bit concerned about the proposal to continue the IAG and ECN, particularly because business and finance are developing such a strong role in the process. Just look at paragraphs 26 and 27, page 6, if you have access. The original objective was to ensure that mainstreaming was included in the post-2020 GBF. So we think it's now time for parties to the CBD as a whole to take up that process, rather than letting the IAG continue in parallel. So, coming to content. In those three strategy areas of the LTA, of the LTAM, government and its policies, business and finance sector, and 3, society, business and finance are the most powerful. And we feel this imbalance has to be addressed. Strategy area 1, mainstreaming biodiversity across government. Governments have to regulate the business and finance sector at national and international levels, taking a whole of society approach in the interests of biodiversity and society. Yet regulations only mentioned indirectly in 1.3. Action area 2, perverse incentives with negative impacts on biodiversity are calculated at $500 billion a year minimum. So it's vital that governments regulate for their removal. And I was very glad to hear about that from Peter White, for example. Redirecting harmful subsidies could just release vital funding for biodiversity as well. WWF says global banks have, since 2016, financed fossil fuels with $2.7 trillion. Divesting from harmful sectors is crucial and banks have to be regulated too. Strategy area 2, integrating biodiversity into business models, operations and practices, etc., including the financial sector. How is this going to be carried out? How is it going to be verified? We need concrete examples for society to examine. Action areas 3 and 4, indicators for success. These only mention processes, not results. Actions 3.1, agreeing a set of biodiversity metrics. How? How can we agree a set of biodiversity metrics? How can we set a market price on the intrinsic, ecological, genetic, social...
Helena, I'm afraid we've lost you.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. What's happened?
I can hear her.
Can you hear me?
Personally, yes.
Bianca says she can hear me well.
Yes,
So,
we can hear you well.
Okay.
You're heard in Iceland.
Shall I continue then? Okay. This set of biodiversity metrics, as the CBD defines it, the intrinsic ecological, genetic, social, economic, scientific, educational, cultural, recreational, and aesthetic, and I would add spiritual values of biological diversity and its components. It's beyond price for IPLCs and for all of us. So, transition to sustainable production practices. Voluntary standards and certification are simply not enough. Governments must regulate business and finance and hold them liable for damage to biodiversity, and they must punish infringements. Action area 4 with financial institutions. They're just too powerful at the moment. They lack transparency, and their interactions reinforce their power and that of business at the expense of other sectors of society. And governments, I'm afraid, fail to intervene. How would the actions proposed in 4.1 to 4.4 biodiversity metrics, tools, commitments, positive impacts be checked for their effectiveness? And how would the financial institutions be held to account? So in the draft recommendation, we're a bit alarmed by 16E, which appears to seek to further empower business within the CBD process, thus increasing the imbalance we've referred to. Strategy area 3, mainstreaming biodiversity across society. For people to be able to live in harmony with nature, the issues of extraction, exploitation, and overconsumption have to be tackled, as we've said, but people can't do this themselves without government regulating business and finance. Indigenous peoples, local communities, small farmers, and women understand local biodiversity best and have to be heard and their advice followed. People everywhere, when involved in processes of deliberative democracy, come up with very wise recommendations that may be very difficult for governments to reach. We need more of that kind of insight to help us along the way. Nature-based solutions. I'm afraid we feel that this term should be deleted. It's not CBD language, and it's also linked to the idea of net positive solutions, which basically means that biodiversity in area A can be destroyed so long as this destruction is offset by protecting or restoring area B. We've already passed the limits as far as this kind of trade-off is concerned. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Helena. Very good points. We are very aware. I just want to say, first of all, that from our standpoint, while it is very encouraging to see, as you mentioned, the interest of business and finance in biodiversity issues, I mean, it is an unprecedented level of interest, and we're all very happy about that. We used to say we want finance and business to understand the role of nature, and it has happened to a large degree. So this, of course, and as you so well said, brings the need to enhance the capacity and recognize the need to inform and prepare and organize civil society and indigenous people and local communities. And I'm very glad to say that most other members of the IAG have wholeheartedly supported you. So as Lars was also saying, The long-term approach is just one of the tools. We will need many more. So we're thankful for your contribution up to now. We encourage you to continue your participation. And speaking of hearing the voice of other people, I'm afraid we have not been able to involve Georgie Carino. Unless I'm mistaken, I'm trying to find her among the participants, but I'm not succeeding. So we may not be able to do that. But while we wait for her to maybe manifest herself, meanwhile, I'm very glad to note that Mr. Ezequiel Benitez has also participated in this call. And therefore, without any further ado, Ezequiel, and thank you so much for your time and for your guidance. I should say also Ezequiel, of course, plays many roles, but through the good work of Victor Alvarado from Conabio, Mexico is one of the parties contributing to the long-term approach. So thank you, but I suppose you're now speaking on your other many hats. So Ezequiel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and hello to everybody. Just a few words from the point of view of SOFSTA chair. It is clear that the impact of sectors on biodiversity and the current negative trends, it's a reality, and we need to act at the right level. So this is a very good opportunity where we see everybody that mainstreaming is a key piece for the post-2020 biodiversity framework. In fact, as was mentioned by Charlotta, in CBD we already start with elements for agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and tourism in Cancun, and followed by energy, mining, infrastructure, manufacture, and health in Egypt. We are all already fully convinced of the importance. There is no doubt about it. I think the challenge is how to do it, how to implement it in practice, and how to measure this. Even the informal advisory group is advisor for the Secretariat. I'm happy to see recommendations from document 13 on SBI 3 on agenda item 11, where they are inviting co-chairs to take advice on the ways to include mainstreaming on the post-2020. I hope they can receive the message and to see the advice also. And also there are some recommendations to COP to adopt a long-term approach. So we need to take this seriously into the new global framework, but also with elements. And here is a request from SOFSTA. What we will appreciate is your advice on indicators to measure, to validate progress, in particular for those sectors that are impacting biodiversity, to turn it into a positive change. So we need more elements in how to do it. We're already convinced. Mainstreaming implies inclusiveness, implies teamwork from all sectors and all stakeholders. So we need that glue to point to the same direction and to measure if we are going to a good port. I'd like to thank the Informal Advisory Group, the Secretary for this work, and I wish you all the best in this group, in this meeting. I have to leave now to another meeting, unfortunately. And I wish all the best in SBI 3 deliberations and the confirmation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say these words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezequiel. Thank you also for your work. Very welcome. At this moment, we have the following situation. I'm trying to talk to organizers to see if we can go with the webinar up to 11 a.m. And so I haven't yet been advised if this is feasible, but I will hope that it is, because that would give us still time enough to listen to enough of you. So at this moment, and since I have not received confirmation of the presence of Georgie Carino, who represents the Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity in the CBD, and who was one of the participants in the informal advisory group, whose voice has represented very emphatically that of Indigenous people and local communities. I should also say, as also Helena has rightly mentioned, the extended network has been constituted because so many parties and so many non-parties wanted to contribute to mainstreaming. It was an unprecedented level of interest. So we constituted an extended network, And in this extended network, there's also 2 representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities. But still, at this moment, I'd like to welcome any other statements. Please, when you do introduce yourself, please tell us quickly who you are, and you may also, to avoid everyone trying to speak at the same time, maybe you can just send a message when you want to speak. But since we haven't done that, I know, for instance, that Mr. Victor Alvarado was on board and wanted to make a statement. I also invite Claude, who was on board, but I see and notice now that Mrs. Barbara Patterson, who has been working with us to coordinate the EU's position on mainstreaming, has requested to speak. So please, Barbara, over to you. Barbara, can we hear you?
I hope, yes. Hello, everybody. Can you see and hear me?
Yes,
okay.
we can. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. Distinguished Executive Secretary, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, everybody. It is my great honor to speak in this webinar on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We thank the Secretariat and the Informal Advisory Group for their work and for organizing this meeting today. A whole of government and society approach with a strong engagement of all actors and sectors is essential for effectively addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss and reaching the 2050 vision and the 2030 mission for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We are happy to see already many elements that will contribute to biodiversity mainstreaming in the framework. We find it important to ensure consistency between the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and the long-term approach to mainstreaming. And although the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group comes only after SBI 3, we think that the post-2020 framework and its monitoring framework should be the starting point. We recognize there is some coherence already, namely with targets 13, 14, 15, and 17 of the updated Zero draft, broadly corresponding to the 3 action areas in the long-term approach to mainstreaming that focus on policies, on production and supply chains, and on harmful subsidies and the financial sector. We see that the LTAM as an important guidance for implementing these targets once agreed. At the same time, we find it very important to address mainstreaming in agriculture, forestry and fisheries, and other sectors through all action targets of the updated Zero draft and their relevant monitoring elements and indicators. The European Union and its member states need more clarity on the integration of the LTAM into the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Furthermore, mainstreaming should be addressed in a coherent way and jointly with the resource mobilization and capacity development components of the new framework. Finally, multi-stakeholder mobilization is of crucial importance for the sectoral implementation of biodiversity policies. A renewed and strengthened action agenda for biodiversity could be instrumental to catalyze commitments to concretely support the implementation of the framework, notably by creating coalitions and communities of practices. The European Union and its member states stand ready and committed for further discussions on how to best and most effectively integrate mainstreaming into the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And I'd like to note, not only through Lars, but also working directly with you, the EU biodiversity strategy, I think, has many excellent aspects on mainstreaming. And we look forward to your further leadership in the group. It's maybe at this point, I just want to recall what is the process from now to COP15. So these two documents that you see before you, just to remind you of that, are now open for your positioning. And in theory, they will be discussed at the subsidiary body on implementation at its third meeting next, and then at the third meeting of the working group on the open-ended working group for the post-2020 framework. And then, of course, be led to COP15. This being said, due to the postponement of SPI3 and SBSTA, there is some discussion going on of some kind of consultation or discussing happening still before the meeting of SPI3 and Working Group 2020, the third meeting. But for now, this is the perspective. I have not yet read any other wish to speak, but I do know, Victor, are you online? Would you like to make a statement? Victor Alvarado, representing Mexico. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Oliver. Good morning to everybody. Good evening, good night. I would like to thank the Secretariat and the colleagues in the AG and the Extended Network for all the work done in pulling the LTAM document together. Just a quick note to share with all that ECLAC, that's the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, with support of the Institute for Sustainable Development and the International Relations of France, is conducting two experience from other countries in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. The first one in the mainstreaming of biodiversity in other sectors, and the second one from innovative governance policies or initiatives related to the transformative change proposed in the post-2020 GBF. The goal of both studies is to deepen our knowledge in the sets of actions that represents levers to initiate and accelerate change in favor of biodiversity, based notably on examples of other transitions in the region to contribute to a South-South learning process. In addition, both studies will provide a stock talking of existing studies, conceptual frameworks, and country proposals that could feed international discussions on baselines for the goals and indicators that have been proposed in the new GBF in the framework of COP15. Both studies are being developed through a case study methodology covering contributions to achieve the CBD goals and potential tools and solutions for implementation of the post-2020 from interventions in economic and business sectors, and also from the perspective of national and subnational governments. The results of the studies are being also worked with a high-level expert group established from a regional dialogue organized by ECLAC and IDRI in September 2019 to deepen the scope of the study's proposals and advance in the construction of a regional vision on biodiversity issues. This study may constitute a basis to open space in future regional dialogues on public policies and private initiatives that can contribute to implement the post-2020 GBF and to achieve the goals established in it, as well as the objectives of the 2030 agenda. So both reports are planned to serve as inputs for open-ended working group 3 and other pre-COP 15 negotiations. I would finally like to underline, Oliver, that and all that Marcia Tambuti, biodiversity specialist from ECLAC, is present in this meeting. Thank you very much for all the work done.
Thank you so much, Victor, also. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Susan Campbell from the Government of Scotland, who has very aptly been one of the coordinators of the Edinburgh process, which is really a new procedure. It's a whole movement that is a partner to the open-ended working group that hears the voice of subnational governments and local authorities. Thank you, Sue. Go ahead.
Hi, Oliver. Thank you very much for this opportunity to provide an intervention. As you mentioned, through the Edinburgh process, the Scottish Government has been working with our global subnational partners to galvanise the subnational governments, cities and local authorities across the globe for the post-2020 framework. And we've developed our Edinburgh Declaration, which sets out commitments for that level of government, and also calls to action by state parties. And one of our commitments relates to ensuring mainstreaming biodiversity across public, private and business sectors for the greater environmental, society and economic resilience. And recognising the role that the subnational governments, local authorities and city authorities will have in implementing across all aspects of the framework. It's really great to see the approaches set out in the LTAM and the Associated Action Plan, and that subnational governments are mentioned within those. This really chimes with the Edinburgh processes. And we look forward to ensuring both the horizontal and vertical mainstreaming across different levels of government. Through the Edinburgh Declaration, we're also calling for state parties to recognise the role of the subnational governments, cities and local authorities throughout the framework. And this obviously includes mainstreaming. And we're looking to update our plan of action for subnational governments. So the LTAM and the action plan set out will help us to do that. But we're also calling for a dedicated decision for more and greater inclusion of the subnational government level at COP15. So we want to bring that to SBI 3 under agenda item 11. And finally, we're also, through the Edinburgh Declaration, calling for a multi-stakeholder platform to ensure representation of the subnational governments and city and local authorities. And that should also support the mainstreaming aspects of this level of government as well. So we hope that state parties will be able to see the relevance of the Edinburgh Declaration and the Edinburgh process under agenda item 11 at SBI 3 and how it relates to both the LTAM and the post-2020 framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. This was great. And again, I've posted the text of the Edinburgh Declaration for those who are interested. It contains quite a lot of interesting suggestions. I'd like to acknowledge that the chat room has been very rich in exchanges, and particularly I see it's not a question exactly, but Marina's point on the how being the most important issue is very much true. I also want to indicate, I just checked we had up to 146 participants at some point, but none of them was the co-chairs of the working group on the post-2020 because they're very busy people. But we have Jyoti Mathur Philip, our director, in the call, and I'm sure that I can share with her that we will inform, of course, the co-chairs, and they are very much aware. There's a part of this document that is specifically directed at the meeting of the WG 2023, and so we hope that this will be there. I think overall, as we made it clear, there are already many elements of the JBF in the LTAM and vice versa. In my way, I think we're looking at the same elephant from two perspectives. So basically the language is the same. What we need to now is exactly to do what you're saying, Marina, to find the how, exactly how it's going to happen. And I do believe that from SBI 3 onwards, the continuation of the work of the informal advisory group and the extended network is very important for that. I'm opening the floor for any other contributions. If not, I will then go to the closing remarks. Would anyone like to talk right now, please just go on straight and state your name, please.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Sorry, can you identify yourself again, please?
I want to identify myself. I'm Simona Lovera from Global Forest Coalition. Thank you for this very interesting event. And yeah, I posted a question in the chat actually. I want to congratulate the Informal Advisory Group on its work. I think it's a very useful approach to LATAM. However, I have a question about the institutional structures that were proposed to actually ensure proper implementation of the LATAM, or the IM, as some people have suggested. Because it seems quite contradictory to suggest that an advisory group would be an appropriate body to actually monitor implementation of a structure like at LATAM. From an institutional governance perspective, you know, integrating LATAM into the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and the institutional structures that have already been proposed to monitor implementation of that entire global biodiversity framework seems a lot more logical approach. Of course, the SBI plays an important role there, but there's a whole range of, you know, structures set up already to ensure implementation of the GBF in the future. And if we really want to mainstream the LATAM, then it seems much more logical not to continue with the advisory group, but rather to ensure that this is fully mainstreamed into the GBF monitoring structures. So if someone could clarify a little bit this thinking behind that proposal, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, I will try to address that question from the perspective of the technical perspective of the Secretariat. But thank you, first of all, Simone, for your excellent question and good remarks. At the moment, there is no such body. So what we have is an informal advisory body. So what we're looking for is to exactly provide parties with a model of how exactly this multi-stakeholder platform can happen. Now, if we look at the technicalities, the only way for that to be created is for the informal advisory group to suggest an exact outline, or any party can suggest an exact outline. Then it has to be put onto the agenda and then discussed. So this is why we're saying that possibly the informal advisory group could be requested to continue work and formulate such a body. But you're very right, Simone. I mean, it's informal and it's advisory. It's not formal and it's not co-management. So that is a weakness in the process. And we have highlighted that, as well as the other weakness in the process up to now, that you have the long-term approach and you have a document that's called action plan, but the work needs to be done by parties or non-parties to make that action plan and the long-term approach be transformed into actual strategies and action plans that include mainstreaming as part of NBSAPs or other development plans. I hope I have addressed at least the first level of response. I wonder if there's any other questions. And again, for instance, some of the conversations may happen in parallel. For instance, I can see that Melissa from Colombia is asking Peter White of the World Business Council to share the kind of work that is going on. So all of that's happening in parallel. Anyone else, please, to make a statement right now, please? Ismail, I think you're trying to speak, but I don't hear you. Yeah, I'm afraid we don't have sound coming in from you, Ismail, if you're speaking. And again, if you're unable to send us your intervention during this webinar, which we should be closing in a few minutes, please feel free. I will send my email again on the chat space. Please feel free to send me your intervention. If I see no one else, Marcus, would you like to make any closing statements, or should I? Please go ahead.
No, I mean, no, I mean, please do so, Oliver. You're the master of ceremonies here. But just to quickly say from my side, I mean, thanks a lot for your lively participation, for the frank feedback given. I mean, as I said, this is just basically a stepping stone, and in fact, the real work for parties in particular starts now, basically digesting what we working together with the IAC have proposed. So in that sense, I think it was a very useful first exchange, and thank everyone for their active participation again. Over to you, Oliver.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank everyone, and I'd like to again reiterate, this is an ongoing process. The informal advisory group is going on until SBI 3, so we will be in touch with you. Please feel free to send us any comments through the email. And I think basically as conclusion, I can only say that, you know, that this is a very capable group of people, that we're continuing our work, that all of you are very much invited to send us not only your comment, but also, for instance, one thing I have not said is that we will still present an information document that will take each of the activities, the more detailed activities, the suggested activities of the action plan, meaning of SBI 313/add1, and will give references and sources and important documents that we have been given by the informal group and many other players. So it will be kind of a reference source of information, InfDoc. So if you have any document or any contribution to that information document, please do send it to my email, because then we can enrich the third and last document that will be part of the long-term approach, which is kind of a compilation of useful sources going from, you know, IFC 6 to all the others. So for now, I'd like to thank you very much for this very good exchange. I'd like to welcome all the 146 participants at some point, and I look forward to the continuation of the work on the informal advisory of group on mainstreaming. Thank you to all of you. Have an excellent rest of the week. Thank you very much.